right, so straight away I wanted to go through this imagery of, well, I was talking before about the horsey tail, and I was like, I'm not finding it on their little battle hats. But then yet there it is. Occasionally you'll find the horsey tail. Like here's the horsey tail. And then even in a, we have a live human here with a horsey tail. So it is correct, the reference about it. Now this looks like an ostrich plume more than a horsey tail, and that's feathers, so I'm not sure what's going on there. But they're coming up as Merovingian, and well, their outfits, if you notice, they're all different, and yet they're all kind of wearing a skirt, kilt style, short mini dress, skirt. Again, more of these. What is all of this? You know, those funny papoose boots, crisscross with the leather to keep them on, the crisscross wrap. Wow. But yeah, so, and then of course I'm not seeing the shield they were discussing, which was an oblong shield. It was made of actual branches. These ones are more made of wood. So there could be a slight difference in what you're seeing here versus what's being yeah, that's pretty classic on there with the little outfit. Yeah, so they, you know, they do look a little bit Scottish, and why they're wearing skirts, I don't know. It's just the fashion. Maybe it was the Roman, the Gallic look. Maybe it was just the look of the times. The men were in some sort of a skirt look, and also it would have been easier to make rather than pants. There's more of an oblong there, an oblong sword there, but a shield. Remember, they had to have these oblong shield of just on them at all times in certain years of this era, just to, you know, prove who they were. And if they didn't have it, there were going to be consequences. I don't know what that one was. It was some kind of a little, some doll. Yeah, they've even made dolls of them in miniatures. So there appears to be, with these images, if you can look, there's just discrepancy. You're not always seeing the horsey tail, and neither are you seeing it red. So I don't know where they got it from, but it's written in the text. So, well, and with these guys, yeah, look at that. I mean, I'm thinking of Spartans and all of that. I'm thinking of Romans. But yeah, the war pieces, what they're using a lot of the time is this javelin. This guy's got a javelin. And apparently Dagobert, they're saying he was the peak of the kingdom of the Merovingians, and then after that, you know, it's all going to go downhill. But that's what I'm reading next, is after that. So, oh, here we go. Now this one is a Visigoth warrior, and that looks like a little bit of a red headpiece on top. Right there. So, and yeah, red itself, the dye is difficult to be had, and normally was only afforded to royalty. So Not sure where they were doing all this red dyeing, like I was saying. There's an oblong, but that's 12th century now. So maybe they just all of it's a little off. Here's some more oblongs. Yeah, and chances are they weren't like this. They were definitely more just made out of wood, but yet branches, so woven in a way. Yeah, so they weren't using. They had the metal for all of the points of the javelin, etc., and swords. So when they all started getting metal for their shields, I don't know. But it definitely happened eventually. Right. And one said that his sword, anyone that was as tall as his sword was up for being massacred. He used his sword as the gauge. All right. Well, I know I'm a little tired of reading, but I've got to continue. Clovis II. 638 AD. On the death of Dagobert, the royal family of France began rapidly to decline. The enormous authority usurped by the mayors of the palace during the long minority of his children led them to, by degrees, of the usurpation of the regal dignity, to which alone such power should belong. Interest, ambition, and caprice became the sole rules of their government. They brought up the young princes in a state of shameful inactivity, purposely keeping them aloof from business, inspiring them with no sentiments worthy of their rank and birth, studying their passions, and, not for the salutary purpose of restraint. The salutary restraint, but with the base view of affording them a dangerous indulgence, and even profiting by their disposition to piety, in order to acquire a more ascendancy over their youthful minds, more perfect ascendancy. Vice, indolence, and sloth were the natural offsprings of such an education. So it's saying that the princes they didn't really have to do business. They didn't have to restrain themselves in certain manners, and they were given a lot of freedoms. So here we have them being slothful, indolent, and full of vices. These acts of baseness, however, cannot be attributed to Aegar and Pepin, both mayors of the palace, one in Neustra under Clovis and the other in Neustria under Sigibert. There appeared in their conduct nothing which betrayed a design to encroach on the royal authority, or to oppress the people. The first was a man of exemplary prudence and approved fidelity. The king, on his deathbed, had recommended his queen Nantilda, and the prince for her son to his care, and conduct of Aeger showed that the confidence of his sovereign was not misplaced. The first use which he made of his power was to restore the individuals what the officers of the exchequer had unjustly exacted from them. Pepin, still more respectable from his virtues than from his political knowledge, procured such respect to the authority of his pupil that so long as he lived, it experienced no interruption, either from foreign invasions or domestic commotions. As soon as he entered upon the duties of his office, he sent an ambassador to Clovis to demand a division of the treasures of Dagobert. The request was complied with, and the two ministers, repairing to Compiègne, divided the gold, silver, furniture, clothes, and jewels into 3 lots, the first of which was given to Clovis, the second to Sigibert, and the third to Nuntilda, in compliance with the French Ripuarian law, which ordains that a woman shall inherit a third of her husband's acquired property. Pepin, unfortunately, died the year after this display of his zeal of interests in the matter. The mildness and equity of his government rendered his death an object of lamentation to the Austrasians, and the splendor of his virtues procured him a place in the lift of the Romish saints. Aeger soon followed him, so that the royal family sustained a double loss. The successors of these virtuous ministers neither possess the fame fidelity nor the fame moderation. Erchinoald, the new mayor of Neustra, governed more like a king than a minister. Among his servants was a girl of exquisite beauty, his servants. Her name was Bathilda, whom he married to the young monarch. She was a beauty of strict virtue and a heroic courage, a woman born in England of a Saxon family, from whence she had been carried off when a child, and sold as a slave in France. The author of her life affirms that she was descended from illustrious parents, but as Clovis was a king and Bathilda a slave, the virtue of the latter was insufficient to counterbalance the inequality of the parties in the eyes of the nation. It's very bad. He's got a hold of a slave there. Grimaud, the son of Pepin, aspired to the enjoyment of his father's post, and though powerfully opposed by Otho, the son of Austrasian noblemen, he had been governor to the king. He found means to procure the assassination of his rival, and by that means obtained the object of his wishes. This was the first time that the office of mayor passed from father to son. It afterwards became heredity. While the court of Austrasia was harassed and divided by the intrigues of these ambitious young men, the standard of rebellion was hoisted in Thuringia by Radulfus, Duke of that province. This nobleman was possessed of great military talents. Having conquered the Sclavians and restored tranquility to the province over which he presided, he became elated with success, asserted his independence, and adopted means for the establishment of his authority. It is probable the court had intended to recall him, but as they had never put their designs in execution, he seized the earliest opportunity that occurred openly to declare his sentiments and to commence hostilities against his sovereign. He had entered into a league with a barbarian named Fer, a man of quality, descended from the illustrious family of the Merovingians. Okay, Merovingians, hereditary dukes of Bavaria. That young nobleman, who possessed great riches, a high spirit, and extensive connections, was actuated by resentment for the death of his father. Crodalde, whom Dagobert had ordered to be killed for some crimes which he had committed, an eager desire of vengeance supplied him with the means of raising a considerable army, which he led to the assistance of Radulfus. All the troops in the kingdom were assembled to quell this formidable insurrection, and the king marched in person to oppose the rebels. When the armies met, victory at first seemed to declare in favor of Sigibert. Fer, who had also taken post beyond the Buconian forest on the frontier of Thuringia, was defeated and slain. But the face of the day was speedily changed. The French army next advanced against Radulfus, who had entrenched himself on an eminence on the banks of the river Unstrut. The advantage of his situation induced the king to hold a council of war, in which the sentiments of his officers were divided. Some were of opinion that the assault should be immediately given, while others maintained the propriety of deferring it until the next day. Then the troops would be recovered from their fatigue. The former, however, prevailed, and those who were of the opposite opinion, foreseeing the consequence of this rash decision, remained near the king, with a resolution either to protect his life or die at his feet. The event fully justified their conjectures. As the troops were ascending the hill, the Duke of Thuringia rushed out upon them, and attacking them with great fury, put most of them to the sword. The slaughter was so dreadful that Sigibert, seeing the whole mountain covered with the dead and the dying, could not refrain from bursting into tears. This terrible check spread an universal consternation throughout the Austrasian army, and the king's person being thought in danger, it was judged prudent to enter into a negotiation with the conqueror. Radulfus acknowledged that he held Thuringia under the authority of Sigibert, but at the same time expressed his hopes that he should be confirmed in a post, which he had so richly deserved by his numerous victories over the Sclavonians. The Austrasians were obliged to content themselves with this kind of submission, and to re-establish him in his government, where he afterwards exercised all the powers of king. Well, of a king. This is the only memorable event in the reign of Sigibert, who was a good, well, though not an active prince, more busied in religious foundations than in military establishments, a pious monarch, but a bad monarch, a bad politician rather, and rather formed by nature for obedience than command. Alright, so he wasn't a great commander. He erected and endowed 12 monasteries, yet from a letter of his, which is still extant, it appears that he had sufficient spirit to maintain his authority against ecclesiastical encroachments. It is addressed to Didier, Bishop of Cahors, and contains some severe reprimands on the subject of synod that had not convened without his knowledge. With a strong prohibition to the prelates not to assemble in any place whatsoever without his express permission. It is said that though he was very young and recently married, he adopted the son of Grimaud, but having a son some time after named Dagobert by his queen Imnishilda, the adoption was revoked. The birth of this prince increased the devotion of the monarch and the credit of the mayor of the palace, Sigibert devoting his whole time to works of piety. Grimaud held the reins of government, distributing favours as he pleased, and regulating everything according to his wishes. The king's confidence in this ambitious minister was so great that, finding himself attacked by a dangerous disease, he recommended his son to his care. Sigibert died at Metz in 654 AD, and was buried in the magnificent church which he had recently built in that city, and dedicated to Saint Martin. Dagobert succeeded to the throne without opposition, but he had no sooner ascended it than he was removed from his station by an act of treason, the most abominable. The conspirators, being afraid to make an attempt on his life, cut off his hair and sent him to Scotland, where he long lived in a state of obscurity, under the conduct of Didion, Bishop of Poitiers, who, though descended from Clovis, was not ashamed to undertake the infamous commission. So off he went. Dagobert was sent to Scotland. I bet you didn't expect that one. A report was immediately spread that young Dagobert was dead, and they even affected to bury him with great pomp. The story of the pretended adoption was renewed. No circumstance was omitted that could tend to establish its truth, and such was the extent of Grimaud's power that his son Sigibert was proclaimed king. But the Austrasians, shocked at these proceedings, had recourse to arms, deposed the new monarch, and seizing the mayor of the palace, conducted him to the king of Burgundy and Neustria. It is not known what punishment was inflicted on this perfidious minister, nor what became of the young usurper, Dagobert, either from a belief that he was dead or from ignorance of his retreat, was not recalled. Austrasia submitted to Clovis, who reunited for the 4th time the different kingdoms of the French monarchy. The reign of this prince, like that of his brother Sigibert, was undistinguished. It really does say that, undistinguished by any brilliant achievement. So it was non-distinguishable. There are few kings of whom more good and more evil. Here we are. Has been said. The motives of their commendation and censure exhibit, in a just light, the judgment and spirit of the writers of those times. A great famine happened in France. Clovis, in order to procure nourishment for the poor, sold the plates of gold and silver which covered the tombs of Saint Denis. His companions, and his companions, he took all the gold and silver off their tombs. This was a charitable action, and truly worthy of a Christian king. But at the same time, it was an encroachment on the treasures of the monks. Clovis says, the continuator of Fredegarius was a prince addicted to every species of vice. He was brutal. He was brutal and unfeeling, a debauchee and a drunkard. Some time after this he obtained for Paris, consented to it, and the deed for that purpose was drawn up in a general assembly. That monarch, who during the whole course of his life had not performed one virtuous action. He was now a great king, says Amiens. Wife, valiant, brave, equitable, full of religion, and highly agreeable to God. So interestingly, going back to the churches, their riches, their wealth is now being taken away from them to some degree. And before I was stating that the women were leaving their husbands and moving into the church, so there would be like a woman of the town that was became the keeper there essentially with all of that wealth. And so maybe that was one of the reasons, because today when we think of a church, we don't think of all of that, do we? We don't think that there's gold on hanging over there and gold on that and silver and everything's got jewels. We don't think of this, do we? But maybe that was one of the attractions. The monks have imputed another crime to him, the seizure of an arm of Saint Denis for the embellishment of his oratory. This appeared a matter of great importance to those who dreaded a diminution of the number of pious pilgrims who went to pay their devotions at the shrine of the French apostle. It was a crime, they tell us, which heaven took care to punish, by depriving Clovis of his, depriving him of his senses. And if the monks may be credited to that impious measure, must be ascribed all the calamities which France experienced under the successors of this monarch, who died in the 22nd year of his age, and the 15th and 16th of his reign. He was buried at Saint Denis. Okay, am I tired? I am getting a little tired today. I'm at 30 minutes. I'm going to stop this one before I head off to Clotaire the Third.